Good evening. This is Jim Agostine, Superintendent of Schools in Region 16. I'm here this evening to talk to you about the building project and the upcoming referendum on December 20th, 2011. With me here this evening are the DM3 students and Mr. Riello's class at the high school. They're conducting this interview and doing all of the edits and work that needs to be done to produce this show so that you may be informed about the upcoming referendum. Well, to start off, I'd like to say that the presentation this evening is going to be in several parts. First, I'd like to define what the problems are we're trying to solve, go through a bit of the process of how we've gotten from that to where we are today, and then discuss the solutions to each of the three problems that I'm going to present to you. We'll also talk a little bit about the costs and the timeline of the project. There are three problems that we're trying to solve with this project. First is to take two existing facilities in Prospect, the community school and Algonquin school, and put those two buildings into one in a pre-K to 5 facility, a new pre-K to 5 facility on the land that we purchased 2 years ago on 79 New Haven Road in Prospect. The second problem is to address safety and health concerns and energy efficiency concerns at Laurel Ledge, in addition to some deferred maintenance issues. And the third is to address the district office space, which we currently rent from a local businessman in town. And we rent that space. It's not the greatest space for us to use, but we feel that that rent income or rent payment that we're making could be used to own something that the district can own in the future. The Algonquin school problem that we're trying to solve, and we've known this problem for many, many years, as far back as 1987, Board of Education members have been talking about the deficiencies that the Algonquin facility has. Those deficiencies have not gotten better in the time that has passed since then. Some of the deficiencies include, for instance, the lower level on the addition to Algonquin School is inaccessible by handicapped students or staff. In order for you to access the lower level from the main level, you would have to go out and around the building and enter at a lower level. It has no gymnasium. The gymnasium is in that basement level, and it's essentially a classroom, two classrooms butted to each other with a regular height ceiling. So it's a very difficult space to do PE in, and the media center is also a classroom space in that lower level. But those deficiencies are only a prelude to the educational deficiencies that the school has. Electrical wiring, for instance, is inadequate in the facility, and we would need to do massive upgrades. The PA system is deficient. The windows are single pane, energy inefficient windows. The space does not lend itself to easy circulation in the building. It has two very distinct wings to it. The office space, the main office space, is inadequate to conduct meetings and PPTs and those types of things. The building is old, it's tired, and it's time to get out of that. The septic system, for instance, too, is below the parking area, which today would be an unacceptable way to use that space. Community school aesthetically is a much more pleasing school, but it's much smaller in square footage, and it too has age-related problems with it. The first of which is that facility will need a roof very soon. We've been putting off purchasing a roof for that because this project has been in the offing. Also, there are 4 portable classrooms attached to the back of community school that are nearing their life expectancy, and those classrooms would have to be replaced in the near future as well. But these facility deficiencies are pale in comparison to the educational difficulties that you have when you create a transition from a pre-K to 3 to a grade 4 and 5 school. Teachers are not communicating between the two buildings, even though we tried very hard to make sure that there's conversations about curriculum between those grade levels. You don't have that daily contact. And 2-year intervals in a school system or in a school setting does not allow teachers to know students by a first name basis. You may know your classroom, but you do not know the 120 or 130 other kids that are in that grade level. And by the time you learn their names, they've moved on now to the middle school. So it makes for a very autonomous kind of environment for students. The problem we're trying to solve at Laurel Ledge is a little bit different. We have a campus-style setting in that building, very pretty setting. I enjoy the courtyard and the views that you have there, and there has been some additions made to Laurel Ledge over the years. The difficulty is that all of the buildings are disconnected, and this requires students to travel from building to building as they go to their specials, to the cafeteria. Any movement to the nurse's office from another building or to the main office requires transport out of doors. And in the school year, a good portion of the school year is during a time of inclement weather. So there's the inclement weather issue. There's also the safety and security issue. You have young children, grades pre-K through 5, that are traveling outdoors to move from one place to another. This is something in modern days that I find to be untenable, and would like to see more security measures in place to make sure that students are not exposed to any factors outside of the school building during the school day. So one of the issues there is health and safety concerns. One of the issues is security concerns, but there's also energy efficiency concerns as well, in the fact that those doors are opening and closing repeatedly throughout the day as students travel to their specials and to lunch and to do errands and that type of thing. To give you for instance, if you take a first grade class, the time that it takes to suit a first grade class to move could be as much as 10 minutes of instructional time lost to dress those students. They move to the cafeteria or to their special. They need to take off their winter gear, settle in for class, another bit of time lost, have the class, resuit, and then go travel back to their original class. Well, if you take 10 minutes as a rough estimate of the time each time they had to suit and unsuit their winter garments, you're talking about nearly a half hour of instructional time that could be lost. So there are instructional impacts to this, as well as the the exposure to the elements and the safety concerns that I spoke about earlier. There's also considerable deferred maintenance at Laurel Ledge. The exterior doors, the jambs and sills and things are deteriorated. We need to replace those. We have concrete porticos over the doors that are spalled and need replacement or removal. We also, all of the roofs at Laurel Ledge in the next 4 years will reach their 25-year life expectancy. So we're talking about fixing all of that deferred maintenance. But there's another big problem, and the other big problem in this is that each of the buildings, each pod, has boys and girls rooms in them. These facilities are not handicapped accessible, and they all have the original plumbing in them. So we need to upgrade this for easy handicapped accessibility and to replace this old and deteriorating plumbing systems. The problem that we're trying to address at the district office is a relatively simple problem. We rent space that is very inadequate space. It too is not handicapped accessible on the second floor. We're spending $56,000 a year to rent this facility, and we believe that in the long term it would be better for us to invest that money towards a mortgage and own the property at the end. The current facility, the second floor, was a part of it was an apartment at one time. So it has a full-size kitchen. There are 3 bathrooms. Downstairs has a kitchenette and 3 bathrooms. It's a maze of corridors and unusable space that we'd like to set up a different location. We studied 4 different possibilities for a district office, and the solution that I'm going to be reviewing with you was the most cost-effective avenue that we could take. Well, it's been a long process to get to where we are today with this referendum and the building project that we're bringing forward. It began 3 years ago, really, when we began studying the purchase of what was then called the Talmadge Hill property on Route 69, which is now known as 75 New Haven Road. That property is 47 acres. We purchased that property in anticipation of a building project. We then the Board of Education then formed an ad hoc building committee to look at the possible solutions to the problems that I described earlier. And the ad hoc committee came up with 32 different possible combinations, all different arrangements of how to fix and address these three problems. For instance, I'll just give you one example, and that is there was a lengthy discussion about using the middle school as an elementary school, pre-K to 5, and then taking and building a new middle school on that property. And that solution was not deemed to be cost effective. So with 32 possible combinations of solutions, the ad hoc committee made some recommendations, and the recommendations were to build a new pre-K to 5 school on the Talmadge Hill Road property, now known as 79 New Haven Avenue or New Haven Road, and do connections at Laurel Ledge, and to take this Algonquin property that would be left over after the project and convert that into a new district office. From that point, the Board of Education approved the formation of a building committee. The building committee is made up of representatives from the town, many of whom have experience in the building trades or in finance or previous experience, for instance, in building the high school at Woodland. So we have a very strong building committee that was formed, and they began in earnest in April of this past year in addressing the needs of the district. Their first task was to hire and to interview architects. We did that. We have engaged Fletcher Thompson as our architects. We also hired the construction company, Turner Construction, as our representative. And together they have been working with the building committee through all that time to come up with the solutions that we're talking about. Ultimately, the board accepted the building committee's recommendation for the solutions that I'm going to be proposing to you this evening. Let's talk now about the elementary solution, the elementary school solution in the Prospect side of the district. Before anything can be done, the Board of Education had to construct what's known as an educational specification for the project. That details what the program is all about at the school. If you think of it as the function of the school, we had to define very specifically what the function is, every program, every space, all the needs that we have in that school to do the job that we do. Think of that as the function. The architect is then charged with designing the form for that function, and that's where this whole process began. So you're looking at a very brief description of what the educational specification for the school is. In this slide, you can see that the new pre-K to 5 school solution is a chevron-shaped building. To the left side, we have the pre-K to K classrooms. That is a single-story building. To the right side, the right wing of the chevron houses at the lower level, at the ground level, grades 1 and 2, and the upper level of that facility would house grades 3, 4, and 5. What's very elegant about this design is that the two wings of the chevron surround the core instructional facilities like the media center, the cafeteria, the gymnasium, and the administrative offices, as well as the specials classrooms. This form allows grade levels to migrate into those special areas and migrate out without crossing the paths of the other grade levels. So in effect, it's creating very distinct small communities of learners. So the kindergarten function remains in the kindergarten wing, and they migrate out to those core facilities. First and second grade does the same. Third, fourth, and fifth will do the same. And so there's very little crossover of the three distinct communities within the school. We located the building in the very north corner of the property. This was very purposeful. The first layouts required far too much earth movement and too many costs associated with that. In addition, water and natural gas are located about 1,000 feet from the tip of this property. And so the closer we stay to that, the less earthworks we have to do to bring those facilities and utilities, I should say, into the property. This particular location also lends itself very nicely to access from Route 69. It's the flattest stretch along the east side of our property. It has the greatest sight lines as well. If you look at the graphic there in front of you, you'll notice that there's extensive parking for this school. That was very purposeful in this process, and the reason for it is that there is no possibility for on-street parking for events at this particular school. All cars would have to come off of Route 69 for parent conferences, for open houses, for special events, and things of that nature that can be held at the school. So we built in 375 parking spaces for this facility. In this slide, you're looking at the front elevation in the center. What you're looking at in that semicircle portion of the building is the media center, just left of the front door. Right of the front door is the main administrative offices. The materials that the building is constructed of have not been finalized yet, but we expect that they will be masonry materials, brick, block, or stone incorporated there. In the lower elevation, you can see the kindergarten wing to the left and the grades 1 through 5 double-story wing to the right. One of the features that we built into the building was for easy expansion in the future. If needed, we could add classrooms to either ends of those chevrons. The next slide shows the rear elevation. You can see that we're trying to grab as much natural light as we can into the gymnasium and into the cafeteria. We provide playscapes, hardscapes, and softscapes in this facility as well. The Laurel Ledge educational specification, we tried to achieve as much parity as we could between the Prospect side and the Beacon Falls side, and so we're calling for the same kinds of amenities, same kinds of classrooms, and the process, the form function process again began with the educational specifications. This is a slide of the current situation at Laurel Ledge. You'll notice that the buildings are disconnected mostly. The gym and the cafeteria to the far left of the screen are united, but the pods going towards the administrative offices are disconnected. The solution that we're looking at is to run 2 parallel corridors down along the interior edges of the buildings on the sides of the courtyard. And that is depicted in the light green shading on these slides. That indicates, the light green shading indicates where new construction would take place. To achieve parity, we're adding a science room, a music room, and those corridors. In addition, we're adding 2 toilets just to the outside of the cafeteria, instead of having kids travel all the way down to the gym lavatories as they do today. The red areas are areas of more intense renovation work. That includes those lavatory facilities that I referred to earlier that were not handicapped accessible, and the plumbing issues that need to be renovated. So those areas need some very specific and difficult work to do. The kitchen, you'll notice, has renovations. The cafeteria has some very light renovations to it. The acoustics in the cafeteria are terrible At this time, we'd like to do some acoustic work in there and update and modernize the kitchen facility as well. The entire structure will be impacted, however, during construction. There will be painting and cleaning and fixing fascia boards and cleaning brick and repairing gutters and that type of thing, in addition to adding the air conditioning, as we have air conditioning in the Prospect Side schools as well. That's the essence of the building project there in terms of the school facility. In this slide, what you're looking at is an aerial view of the site, and you can see it's a very peculiar site in that the school is built on 4 acres of ground, and we have a much larger parcel of land that the district owns up behind there that's kind of pinched off. We need to do some work in this area as well, because we have very inadequate parking for staff at Laurel Ledge, and we want to address that, and we want to provide a hard surface recess area for basketball and 3-square, that kind of activity to occur on that back site as well. In the elevations here, you can see the bottom elevation shows you what the courtyard and the clock tower, the entryway to the cafeteria, could look like. We don't anticipate the new corridors running along either side to have quite as much glass as they do in this depiction, but there will be enough glass so that you can appreciate the aesthetic beauty of the courtyard that's in existence now. The upper photograph is a potential view of what that corridor would look like if you were traveling down the corridor. For the district office, again, it's not quite an educational specification, but it is a specification of the spaces that are required. We went through that process and handed it off to the architects and the construction company to look at and to evaluate. And the solution that we've come up with, we studied 4 solutions very specifically, and this solution was the most cost-effective. Here's how it came about. The Board of Education originally envisioned that when these projects were completed, that the community school and Algonquin school properties would be liquidated, sold, essentially, and the refunds of that would be returned to the taxpayers of the district. However, we discovered in the process that the deed transferring the property that Algonquin is on to the district had a clause in it that said the property could only be used for educational, recreational, or town office purposes. We recognized immediately that the marketability of that property was not as strong as we had originally intended or hoped. So we began to look at, well, maybe we should hold that property. Maybe we should take advantage of the structure that's there. The Algonquin School was built in 2 parts. The main hallway by the administrative offices was done in the early 1950s, and the 2-wing addition was added in the early 1960s. What we thought was to take the best of what that building has to offer, which is actually the older portion of the building, demolish the 2-wing story, fill the hole. It's an easy place to make a break in the building, because that's where the second building was actually added on in the first place. And then take the front wing and do very light renovations to it to use the facility as our district offices. We're talking about putting more energy efficient glass in, cleaning, painting, retrofitting some of the toilet spaces, and then light renovations throughout, putting up some interior walls to sequester workspaces and that type of thing. But in essence, not doing much to the building, keeping it as minimal as possible. The annex, the kindergarten annex that's currently in use, we would like to just retain that space as there may be an opportunity in the future to use that as an educational space if the need ever arises, but not to touch that in this. We'd also retain the cafeteria and the kitchen just because it's cheaper to leave it in place than it would be to tear it down. and it could function very well as meeting spaces for the district for professional development activities, those types of things, or it could be used by citizens and taxpayers as meeting spaces or function spaces if we so desire in the future. The main corridor affords us more square footage than we actually needed, and so we took 4 classrooms in the far right of the diagram, and we're not going to touch those 4 classrooms. That will be strictly storage space for the district, which we need. It would allow us to buy paper, for instance, in bulk instead of in periodic installments, and maybe accrue some savings in that fashion. So we would add some parking, and in the slide in the aerial view here, you can see that where the 2-story wing once stood, you now have some parking spaces. In addition, the old parking spaces that cover the septic system would just remain in place. So that brings us to what do the projects cost? First of all, let's look at the new school and what the estimates are for that. Well, the new elementary school, the estimated gross cost would be $36,608,000. The net cost to the district, after we take advantage of the 68% reimbursement rate, would be $13,911,000. Laurel Ledge, the estimated gross cost would be $7,746,000. And again, taking advantage of the reimbursable components of that project, we estimate that the project will cost $4,260,000 to the district. And district offices, estimated gross cost of $2,371,000, with a net cost to the district after reimbursables is $1,553,000. So you can see that taking advantage of the reimbursable components of the projects, you can see that our estimated gross cost for all of the projects at $46,725,000, actually the net cost to Region 16 would be $19,724,000 in round numbers. The estimated cost to Beacon Falls for that would be $7,889,000, and the estimated cost to Prospect would be $11,834,000. The impact to the taxpayers in Region 16, as we're advised by bond counsel, is using a 2% bond rating, is $102 per $100,000 of assessment. We actually anticipate being able to go out for bonds in the 1.5% range by the time the project goes out to bid. The timeline for the project, we are at the December 20th referendum in the top yellow bar there. Assuming that the referendum is favorable, we would immediately engage Fletcher Thompson and Turner Construction to begin their work on the documents that need to go to the state of Connecticut, called the EDO 49, which would be submitted in time for June. They have to be submitted on a yearly basis before a June deadline. And then they begin the very intensive portion of the design. Up until now, it's been conceptual design. So from now until well into the end of 2012, you would do the schematic design and review for Laurel Ledge and the Board of Education offices, and the design and review for the new elementary school. We would not begin bidding the project until the early spring of 2013. And you'll notice that the two vary somewhat in their length of time because one is more complicated than the other. And construction would begin in the spring, for instance, of 2013 with the Laurel Ledge project. You'll notice that the construction component of the Laurel Ledge project is actually larger than the new school project. And the reason for that is that Laurel Ledge is an occupied building. And so we would need to have 2 complete summers while students are not in the building to do a lot of the heavy construction work. Whereas the new elementary school, once we begin the process, you're looking at 14 to 16 months because there are no students around, there's no traffic to deal with. and they can really move on that building construction. Once the two buildings are up and running, only then will the Board of Education then begin the process of taking the Algonquin property and converting it into our our administrative office spaces. Well, thank you for joining me this evening as we spent some time talking about the building projects. I hope that you'll take the time on December 20th to cast your vote at the usual polling places.